Okay. Is this on? All right. Good morning. Okay, everybody. Woo. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, just one announcement before David gets started. If you had to park in our main lot as our overflow lot today, Kim Hopcraft has the sticker you need to get out. Kim, can you wave your hand for us? Great. So if you need that parking validation, you can just please go to Kim after the meeting, after the training. And today, after David speaks, we are going to have our training on art in the language of poetry. So if you do not know that tour, I encourage you to stay. It's going to be very thorough, yet exciting and engaging. All right, so at that, I'm going to turn it over to David Stark. All right, you have your mic, right?
Yep. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'll be talking about the exhibition entitled Shakespeare in Prague, Imagining the Bard in the Heart of Europe. More specifically, the heart of Europe would be the Czech Republic, but in certain cases, the boundaries are a little wider. And the show is days from opening, Thursday evening. I hope everybody will be able to come for the opening, or if not, be able to see it when it opens to the public on February 10th, on Friday. And so it's essentially about productions of Shakespeare plays in Prague in the 20th century, beginning in the early decades of the 20th century and going up to the present time. And this was a very tumultuous era. It's the 20th and early years of the 21st century for the country that's now the Czech Republic, because, what was happening in Czechoslovakia during this time? Beginning around 18, 19. The rise of nationalism, that's putting it so mildly. The rise of fascist dictators and Nazis. So there was the Nazi occupation of the relatively new country of Czechoslovakia. I've got maps, so I'll explain this in more detail in a minute. So yes, the Czech people suffered under Nazi occupation. So they were liberated. World War II was over, yay. And then what happened? The communist coup in the late 60s, so there was Soviet occupation, so once again their freedom was stifled. And the relevance of Shakespeare to all this was that productions of the plays weren't really stopped by the Nazis, by the communists, and the nature of Shakespeare's plays was such that there are universal messages, and there are so many ways that the plays can be interpreted and presented, that messages having to do with things like personal integrity, courage under pressure, national identity, depending upon the play and the way it was produced, these messages could be conveyed covertly, and the authorities couldn't exactly do anything because it was such a gray area, and the interpretations or the meanings could be subtle and have a great deal of meaning to the Czech people, and it might go over the heads of their occupiers, or the occupiers might not be even paying enough attention to realize. So it's a really interesting assortment of and variety of styles and media that you'll see in the exhibition. You see a couple examples here, a stage set and a costume, Romeo and Juliet, The Tempest. This is a partnership with Ohio State. There's a professor, Joe Brandesky, who teaches at the Lima campus, and he's Czech by nationality, and many of you, I'm sure, saw and gave tours of the puppet show a number of years ago, Czech puppets, and so he's worked with Czech scholars, and some of these scholars will be visiting. For example, Vlaska Kubska will be giving a Thursday evening lecture. Barbara Priadova is going to be visiting. And there's a Theater Research Institute at Ohio State, which has lent objects. And most of the Czech objects come from the Arts and Theater Institute and the National Museum in Prague. After the show leaves Columbus in late May, it goes to, and isn't this the greatest name ever for a university, the University of the Incarnate Word? I think Nanette still can't get over it. I usually try to say UIW in San Antonio, and they will have the pleasure of hosting the exhibition. It'll be a little reduced in Texas in the summer and into late September. Moving on. Oh, so pretty much what I said. One additional piece of information that's interesting. Performances of Shakespeare plays have a long history in Prague, going back to the lifetime of Shakespeare. Some of the productions date back that far. And so the drama of the exhibition, as I said, has to do with the Nazi and Soviet occupations. They were indeed a channel of expression in heavily censored eras of Czech history. And I think one of the parts of the exhibition that you will enjoy most is that which is devoted to contemporary productions, or we consider contemporary, for the purposes of the exhibition, anything done after 1989, which is more or less the overthrow of communism and the eventual establishment of the Czech Republic, as opposed to Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic in 1993. And so here is the history lesson, and not to worry, it's only the bottom two maps that have directly to do with objects in the exhibition, but there are references for various works that refer to the medieval Bohemian kingdom, which Prague was the capital of, beginning in the 12th century. And then in the Renaissance period, the Czech people were absorbed into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that empire, that was kind of the part of that empire, or the areas directly, in the south of that empire, this was the powder keg that launched World War I, which resulted in the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Czechoslovakia as a nation was born. And so it encompassed not only the Bohemians or the Czechs in the west and the Slovaks in the east, but the Moravians in the center. And so Czechoslovakia, born after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles that ended the war in 1918, and it persisted as a country until the so-called Velvet Revolution of 1989, and then the establishment, the separation of the Slovaks from the Czechs. So there is now the Czech Republic, capital Prague, and Slovakia, the capital of which is Bratislava. And so big exhibition, about 150 objects, and there are a lot of illustrations, like you see here, of costume and stage design. That's what most of the objects consist of, sketches of of stage sets and scenic design. There are a few three-dimensional models of stages, and in addition to costume and design sketches, there are, I should have added that to the list, there are, in the final section, a whole gallery of mannequins with costumes that come from Czechoslovakia that are really beautiful and compelling, and some of them are very funny, and they're just really a lot of very enjoyable to look at. And in some cases, not only photographs and I could have added videos. There are some flat screens that show performances of contemporary productions, and digital reproductions. The very final works that I'll talk about are, as is so much art, commercial and fine arts today, composed not with a brush or a pen, but on a computer. So there are computer-generated set designs that are included. And these are the list of plays. I think there are, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are 16. And all categories of Shakespeare plays, history plays like Richard III, comedies like Midsummer Night's Dream, and tragedies like Romeo and Juliet. But all the major plays and many minor plays are represented in various portions of the exhibition. And what's really interesting, one of the many interesting things to me is, for example, you can look at Hamlet and productions of that play in the very early decades of the 20th century through the 20s or 30s, during the World War II period, and contemporary productions of it. I'm always supposed to talk about the big idea, which is, of course, a great way to present the material, and keeping in mind, for hundreds of years, Shakespeare, an important figure in Eastern European life and culture, right? Very basic, and I've already kind of fleshed out the reasons why he is so important to the Czechs, why he was during each decade of the 20th century. And so we hope that you will, the visitor will, and you might guide the visitor in discovering how Shakespeare's work is embedded in the history of this region and the nation and these people through the labels and wall text. And Mayor Lee Mustaf has done a really nice job with the audio tours, or collective voices. Not only Joe, the guest curator of the exhibition, Joe Brandesky, but the various actors and representatives of the local theater community have made recordings that are sprinkled through the exhibition that will really help enrich your understanding and appreciation of many of the works. And the way that theater has a role in communicating and impacting a culture, not just, these plays weren't just sources of amusement and entertainment, although certainly they were a nice distraction for people who lived under very grim conditions. But the fact that they, in terms of the stage design and the concept of the various productions, that they had these messages, that they served as a source of protest, of inspiration, and yes, relief, the comedies, comic relief from the harsh realities that the Czechs were confronted with. And I should say Czechs and Slovaks, because there were many of these designers and producers and actors. I mean, since the Czech Republic and Slovakia were one nation, there was a lot of interaction of the two peoples. And then the cross-pollination or influence of one art form on another, theater and art, and fine art. One of the themes is how fine art movements like expressionism and surrealism had their effect on scenic design, and how even today, contemporary artists sometimes look to stage design as an alternative to the gallery system and commercial sale of their works. There are many advantages that fine artists that would otherwise painters or sculptors or installation multimedia artists, a lot of satisfaction that they and fulfillment they find in designing for theatrical productions, particularly of Shakespeare. And don't be afraid. There are a lot of themes as you go from gallery to gallery. The way that the works are grouped together, there are two acts. That was the original conception, but we simply have one section, the first section of the exhibition labeled historical. And so that is everything from the beginning of the 20th century up until the Velvet Revolution, the fall of communism in the Czech Republic. And so there's an advantage of having so many different themes. That means that there are small areas that are easy to digest. And I'll be going over almost each one of these themes so that poetism, is that a typo? What poetism? That was new to me. That's a uniquely Czech movement that developed between World War I and II that crossed artistic media and was something that Czech poets and fine artists and theatrical designers were engaged with. And the role of fate, et cetera, these things come into play in relationship to the epic historical events that were unfolding during these years, tumultuous years. And then the contemporary, there are fewer themes in the contemporary section of Act Two. Oh, by the way, there's an intermission between the two acts, and that would consist of posters. So you imagine going outside the theater into the street and seeing a few posters, which are very engaging as well. And then contemporary topics include the art of play, elements of wit, ways in which in our contemporary postmodern era, the interpretations of Shakespeare range far and wide, and in some cases are shocking and deliberately so, and break all the rules. And in a lot of ways, postmodernism or contemporary art just thumbs its nose at the conventions of modernism, movements like expressionism and the kinds of values of the so-called modern age, like everything being unique and original, being universal and abstract. These are very largely rejected in the contemporary world of theater design and fine arts. And so the installation is progressing as we speak. It seems that it's about 85%, 90% finished. And you know, the designers and installers are very, preparators are very hard at work because there are the two shows going up. So Scherer, which you've already heard about, is as you face the galleries from the atrium. Scherer is on the left-hand side. It's what you encounter first if you enter from the outside. And then the main entrance to Shakespeare will be that second entrance and exit to the atrium towards the south end. And you can either enter here, or we've designed it in such a way that you might go through Scherer first and then encounter Shakespeare. So we've labeled it in such a way that there's introductory text in both places, and the arrangement is thematic. It's not chronologic. It doesn't really matter that you follow in a given particular sequence, and regardless of which section you enter, you'll very likely encounter contemporary last. So in a very, I just contradicted myself. The first half of the exhibition, there is a very rough chronology because I did say that there was historical versus contemporary, but within, yeah, I should have said within the historical section, the arrangement isn't chronologic, it's thematic. But, and of course, some people may, I think actually don't visitor studies show that when somebody enters a place, they go to the right. So they may go through the contemporary first, which is fine. It's all good. People enjoy it regardless of the sequence. Is there an additional cost? I believe, yeah, for both exhibitions. Kim, is that Kim back there? And it's a bargain. It's a twofer. Two for one. Yes. Indeed.
Will you please say, so we all know about bringing school groups into these exhibitions and whether that's allowed or not?
Yes, Columbus City School groups are always allowed in the special exhibition free of charge, no question. Other groups do pay an upcharge of $1 for students to go into the special exhibition, excluding the time when Decorator Show House is open. We are allowing school groups to go in during that time because of the closures in the 1931 building.
Everybody got that? Great. It's not too complicated. No, everything makes total sense. Yeah. Um, so, and again, I'm afraid these photographs aren't very elegant, but I thought it was better to show you something rather than nothing. The historical section will have, it's color coded, so that you have, and the color is a little distorted here, but this is a kind of a deep olive green for the historical sections, and there are pretty clear demarcations of what the thematic areas are. I think there's very elegant signage. Greg and Michelle, as usual, did a beautiful job of making this exhibition extremely attractive and elegant. And the contemporary section, you have blue floor-to-ceiling banners. So, beginning with the earliest work in the exhibition. So my presentation is going to be, well, actually, at a certain point, you'll see that even my presentation is not going to be chronological, which is good, because it would more parallel the exhibition. But we have, among the earliest works chronologically in the exhibition, those that were done either right after the war or some before the war broke out, so some pre-war works. And I already talked about how the Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated, and with the formation of Czechoslovakia, it was a really important moment for the Czechs because they were no longer absorbed into this larger multinational entity, but had their own nation of which they were very proud. And along with the formation of Czechoslovakia, the birth of a new nation, there was a generational shift where the younger generation sought, as generations do, to establish their identity and distance themselves from their parents' or grandparents' generation, who they blamed for the war. And so they rejected artistically the aesthetics and traditions of stagecraft, which involved concepts like scenery that was very illusionistic and with conventional illusionistic means like linear perspective, one-point perspective and vanishing points, gave the illusion on a flat surface, on a backdrop of deep space. There was also a kind of very general concept of stage design, so that there were generic sets that were used from play to play, playwright to playwright, and it was generic scenery that was interchangeable from play to play. So what the new generation did, embracing the basic principles of modern art, which is all about the flat surface, acknowledging the two-dimensional reality when you're working in a two-dimensional media of the flat surface upon which the marks are made or the images drawn or painted. You have, in the early 20th century, the rise of a movement, the movement Art Nouveau, which literally the new art, meaning it was intended, even though it was born around 1895, it was meant to be art for a new century that was dedicated to decorating flat surfaces. It was very popular in poster art design. Alphonse Mouchat, he's not represented in the exhibition. I should have put not in exhibition here, but I'm just showing this as a source. You have an aesthetic of this new movement based on a whiplash curve, a curvilinear line that is in many cases representational but stylized and exaggerates the hair of women or smoke curling or water currents. And in certain parts of the composition, the line and decorative elements become totally abstract. And it's all about the two-dimensionality of the flat surface. So the new style of stage design represented by an artist like Josef Wenig would be a stage design that looks quite flat and which tends to decorate the flat surface with patterns. This wall for the Merchant of Venice, for example, is parallel to the picture plane. The trees are in silhouette. They're not modeled. They're not shaded and highlighted. So you really don't get the trickery of the eye to try to fool the audience into thinking that something is three-dimensional when it's not. So you have a very beautiful a sense of design, and even the same with costumes. For example, this costume from Macbeth that's decorated with these beautiful patterned surfaces that are highly and richly decorated. And so the sets were now individual for each play. So Macbeth has a whole different series of sets than A Midsummer Night's Dream would or Richard III would. And there are also developments in technology. Instead of candlelight or gas lights that were used at the turn of the century, electricity was introduced, and that produced a whole new range of special effect with colored lights and the flexibility of turning lights on and off, creating illusions of lightning, and the kind of creative use of color to wash the entire stage with a certain color or a combination or patterns of colors. So a lot of exciting things were happening with the introduction and commitment to modernism and modern art of designers like Josef Wenig. And so in addition to Art Nouveau, one of the earliest 20th century movements was German Expressionism. And as an example, again, this is not in the exhibition, but just to show kind of the relationship of the fine arts to the stage design. Here we're looking at I'm going to mangle these names, I warn you right now. Vastislav Hoffmann, King Lear, similar to, and I suppose technically this is Austrian Expressionism, Oskar Kokoschka, an artist of Venice, but this was the closest visually I could think of to compare to this very expressive poster and costume design for the lead character in King Lear. And Expressionism, that's the distortion of color and shape and space in order to intensify the mood or heighten the emotion. And so this great tragic figure who's beset by these terrible tragic issues and problems is portrayed in ways similar to the German Expressionist artist with, and this tendency, the flowing hair overlaps with certain tendencies of Art Nouveau, but you look at the way that these faces are mask-like. There was an influence, we just went through the summer with Picasso, thinking about how African art and masks influenced the development of Cubism. Well, they were also very influential to the Expressionists, looking at new sources and alternative models for creative representation. And other examples by Hoffmann of very colorful designs for the Tempest backdrops that are persist with this notion of flatness rather than the illusion of depth. There's beautiful, colorful patterns. And there's a particular motif here, regardless of the change from act to act, with different designs of the overall backdrops. They look like rainbows in effect, but notice the figure in the circle in the middle. If you're familiar at all with The Tempest, you might be familiar with Ariel, this supernatural kind of sprite-like figure that is kind of a constant that hovers over all of the action. And so that's an example of something that you would not have seen in classical theater design, having the kind of illogical image of this character who's not necessarily there or present, but represented in this semi-abstract scenery. And then the story of Richard III involves a tower, medieval architecture that, again, is not illusionistically presented, but is abstracted. And in both cases, you have a heightened color and the expressive use of line. Here, this kind of modeled, and this is the sketch for the scenery, but I assume that the finished product, when it was designed, was very similar. So a visible, irregular surface that reflects the application of the paint or the medium, and a geometrically conceived design of the architecture. And here's another set of images by Hoffman, which shows for Hamlet not only the lead character, and again, in Hoffman's productions, you had a very kind of exaggerated means of costume design, the very dramatic poses, and notice features like the high contrast of light and dark. There's a fusion of the traditional and the new. For example, the crosses, the Christian elements, the architecture that is generally suggestive of medieval architecture, but yet is designed in such a way that the geometry of Cubism and Expressionism, influenced by Cubism and modern movements, are emphasized. And it's not a coincidence, really, that Expressionism, about a decade earlier, was influential in the development of German cinema, where expressionistically oriented and inspired set designers use these same principles of high contrast of light and dark, and abstracted versions of architecture that were very modern and simplified and radically reimagined in their appearance, yet have references to older structures. The character here is in an old village, but it still looks very modern with painted shadows and highlights and so on. So these kinds of characteristic features are common to the different media: fine art, cinema, theater. And you can really see it in examples like this Hamlet from 1926. And then remember, we left off in the chronology of the Picasso exhibition in the World War I, Picasso and the Great War, during the Surrealist period, with the introduction of Surrealism coming in 1924. And Surrealism casts a long shadow through the 30s and into the World War II period. So that you have an artist like František. And there are a number of artists. There are 3 artists, all named František. And if anybody's Czech, please correct me. Am I pronouncing František? Nobody? Okay, so I'll just say František, and I can say it in English because it means Francis. I mean, the English equivalent is Francis. So three artists whose first name is Francis. This one is Musica. And so Twelfth Night would remind you of surrealistic landscapes, the movement based on imagination and dreams. Does this remind you the style of, I've got a Botticelli, a Renaissance work up here because of the shells. So there are references to classical art, to older tradition. But what about this landscape? Does that remind you of an artist? Of the surrealist persuasion? Salvador Dali? Yes. Actually, there's one other thing that I should mention. Does anybody see, in addition to, let's see, shell, water, sky? Yes, there's a face, right? And that is a surrealist feature that is sometimes compared to or said to be derived from psychology. It's a process called Hineinsehen. That's German, meaning looking into. Hinein, Hineinsehen, into see. Hineinsehen, looking into. And so it's a phenomenon as old as laying on your back and looking at clouds in the sky and seeing pictures of castles and whatnot. And then psychologists use the inkblot test so that you look at something abstract and the images that you see are an indicator of your subconscious, according to that theory. And so surrealism was all about the subconscious and that level of reality that our rational mind is in our waking hours in our normal state unaware of, so that the surrealist job is to dig into our subconscious and draw it out. So we see faces not only in that landscape, but, and that was, for 12th Night, 44, for 41, similar backdrops, for The Tempest. Do you see faces? You know what's the equivalent of that today? Has anybody, these internet memes where you see a brick wall but there's a cigarette in it, that you don't see it first, and then once you see the cigarette, you can never forget it? I should have slipped one of those slides in, but it's kind of, it's a phenomenon that we still enjoy and play with today. Remember the white dress and the internet dress, and some people saw it white, some people saw gold or blue, that kind of thing. So it's kind of your subjective response, and everybody sees things a little differently or at a different rate. And it's all about probing the subconscious. And so I compared the Salvador Dali phenomenon of, okay, what do you see first in this? Do you see a face? But do you also see the landscape? All right, so there's a direct connection here. And this is 1938. And then this kind of rocky fantasy landscape. These are rocks. Is this a place that's, is it a cave? Is it underwater? Is it, oh, look, there's a hand also. So there's a kind of similarity in terms of an imaginary, barren and rather bleak landscape. Another surrealist, Yves Tanguy, that did these very meticulous illustrations of places that never existed except in his mind. And then we come to the section on poetism, the art of poetism. And so that's a movement, as I said in the introduction, it developed between World War I and II in the 20s and 30s. Poetry, the fine arts, stage design. And it's a movement where the creative minds sought to, this sounds very Pollyanna-ish, but to look at the positive in life, and it's kind of countercultural, very in sync with what you would think the progressive creative community would want to do, to get beyond the humdrum conformity of middle class everyday life and see the beauty in everyday things. So they valued qualities like optimism, naivete, innocence. You know, you might say that in American painting between the wars, this notion of regionalism in American scene painting, looking at what's of value to be admired in everyday reality, and looking at America in an optimistic way. This is somewhat similar. It's a little more abstract in the hands of Czech designers like, here's another František Zelenka, designs for As You Like It. What do you think this represents? Yep, so a very stylized forest in the form of the geometric. Did somebody say flowers? Flowers? No? Okay. Oh, lollipops, right. Yeah, yeah, I thought some people were going to say, oh, this is a shelf in a candy store, or is it a forest, the forest of Ardennes, or the setting of As You Like It. Yes, there are geometric shapes, there's overall flatness, but yet he models the geometric shapes so that they look three-dimensional. So in a way, it's kind of a reversion to, or it's a hybrid of more conventional illusionistic, an illusionistic way of painting versus the abstraction that is part and parcel of modernist movements like Cubism. So simplicity, and then through a child's eyes. That was a cornerstone of expressionism as well, that you stop filtering what you feel and perceive and see through the sophistication of your education and social conventions, and you look at everything in a fresh way, as if you're seeing things for the first time, like a child. And so it applies to costume design in terms of costumes for another comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, where the figures look like cartoon figures with costumes that are inspired in part by traditional folk costumes, I believe Moravian costumes. But yet in terms of the flatness and the boldness of the design, it's clearly modernist, but you have this kind of synthesis of the traditional and the new. And here's a 2013 study of the surrealist cultural history of Prague by a literary historian who says that the poetists found poetry in film, in the circus, sport, tourism, and in life itself. The poetry of Sunday afternoons, outings, glittering cafes, intoxicating alcohols, bustling boulevards, and spa promenades. So doesn't that sound like a delightful movement and something you would like to study? If I went back to grad school, maybe I'd study poetism. It put me in a really good mood. And then here's another work from 1930 by Zelenka, Much Ado About Nothing, a set that suggests a garden. These would be pumpkins on a stylized trellis. And now the sad part of the what turns out to be very tragic life of František Zelenka, and we get into World War II and the Nazi oppression. And Zelenka was Jewish. There were Nuremberg laws in the 30s that placed restrictions on Jews that did not allow them to engage in certain professions or to produce art. And Zelenka and his family were imprisoned in Terezin, which was a concentration camp that was set up. It's to the north and west of Prague, closer to the German border. If you draw a straight line between Prague and Dresden, Terezin would be kind of in the middle. And I just learned from, that this was the model concentration camp. Carol, Carol, are you out there? Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So it was a scam, essentially, a propaganda tool. Yeah, yeah. So, and is what I was wondering about until Carol enlightened me, was that Zelenka designed sets for plays, and some plays that he designed sets for were produced. He gave lectures, so it all makes sense now. And unfortunately, we have the design of this set for Richard III for a production that apparently, according to and there was a catalog that accompanies the exhibition with an introductory essay by Joe Vendesky and 3 additional essays by Czech scholars. And the writer of the catalog essay, who talks about Zelenka, does not believe that this production ever happened. And we only have this surviving, the set for Richard III, because his mother hung on to the drawings. He himself, his wife and child, they perished in Auschwitz. So they were shipped from Terezin to Auschwitz. And but the mother survived the war. The artist himself and his family died in '44. And so this represents, and it looks rather grim, doesn't it? And you have representations of a lion's paws that are related to the coat of arms of Richard III. He was, according to Shakespeare's play, terrible, a tyrant who was responsible for horrible, putting people to death. Towards the end of the play, those who he has murdered or had executed come back as ghosts. So you see a kind of haunting, gloomy atmosphere, and the notion of tyranny and the oppression of people that are subjected to this oligarchical and tyrannical rule are very much the kind of the subtext that would have had great meaning had this play been produced. And you can see the gloominess reflected here. There are some details like R, the monogram, the first letter of Richard's name. The pilasters or the engaged columns look like nooses, reference to the people that would be put to death under Richard III. And then the overall design is Gothic. You have the pointed arches of Gothic architecture, but portrayed in a way that represents the kind of sketchy, more modernist approach to sketching and designing. So there's a section called Universal Symbols, going back to this Vlastislav Hoffman. There's an emphasis on the way in which the abstract nature of, yes, his expressionistic but Cubist-inspired expressionistic designs for a 1921 production of Hamlet, very much inspired by artists like Cubists like Picasso, were universal, so that Hamlet had meaning that could be applied not only in Shakespeare's day, but had great relevance and resonance in the 1920s in Czechoslovakia. And there are certain themes, regardless of the political situation, like the conscience of the individual and conflicts with the parents and self-doubt and meditations on the afterlife and so on, all these great themes of Hamlet that affect all man. And by not tying the scenery or the costumes to one particular historical epoch, but making them more general and abstract, you emphasize the universality of the play. And you can see that something has, yes, references to the past, but this could also, you just kind of squint your eyes a little, and this could almost be an Art Deco apartment design in the 1930s. It was said that, let's see, I think Lichtenstein said Art Deco is Cubism for the home. So it's taking these abstract elements and domesticating them and making them more accessible or popular. So this could be a screen, an Art Deco screen. They were very popular in the 20s and 30s, and this kind of a stepped platform. And the very simple, geometrically unadorned nature of the furniture. And then this, alas, poor Yorick, it's a great soliloquy of Hamlet. He's depicted in a way that, yes, it's modern, it's two-dimensional, it's simplified, it's flat, it's related to cubism, it's modernist, but it also, doesn't it look like a grave rubbing? If you took a medieval tomb and rubbed a pencil or charcoal over it. And then we get into World War II, where another production of Hamlet by Musica, who we looked at before, it starts to look very gloomy and threatening. And this was the era when Mussolini and Hitler were coming to power. Here's the furniture design of the throne of I think that's Queen Gertrude, and then here's the throne on the larger set, where you don't have specific medieval columns or architectural elements, but very moody elements of design. And while all this was happening, new technological innovations with sound effects, recordings, I talked about colored lights, and even revolving stages were being introduced. And by the time you get to Truster's, František Truster's Hamlet of 1941, you have something very abstract that suggests this is the wartime now. Yes, Gothic arches, but almost like fences or a barbed wire of military encampments or concentration camps with this wide parabola that's a very modernist shape, but yet is not out of sync with something that you can imagine being set in the Middle Ages. And then we really get into fascism par excellence with a production by Truster of Julius Caesar from 1936. And so this is all about, the dictatorship of Julius Caesar and his eventual assassination, but references, this is surrealistic in terms of the enlarged body parts and colossal head of the figure. And look at these tiny figures below, right? And then body parts very surrealistic and dreamlike or nightmarish, suggesting the oppressive power in relationship to the common man. And surrealists were doing this. Dali was in a different way, but not entirely unrelated, expressing the horrors of fascism that was growing in his country with exaggerated representations of humans. And there's a direct influence that this wasn't mentioned in the catalog, but I think it's pretty clear that this was influenced by the colossal head of Constantine that you can see today in the Capitoline that would have been, I believe, exhibited that way in the 30s, but more or less. I took this picture with somebody standing in front so you could see how large. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Have you seen the head of Constantine in that museum in Rome? And then I just wanted to show how the colossal statue was originally positioned in the Basilica of Constantine, this large building that's now in ruins. And there we go. And so seated and in relationship to the people. So he's really replicating this effect from the ancient world. And then this is my special effect. This is another view of the colossal statue, and look what has happened through the ages. So now it's in ruins, and the reason I show this is that there's a kind of a hidden, with this stage design of something that has literally faded away and fallen to ruin, the notion of tyranny. No matter how powerful somebody is, they eventually die, and their power passes, and human life and governments are transient in the larger course of the stream of history. So there's, I don't know if that's a silver lining, but one, it probably just makes it all more the pessimistic. And then revolving, excuse me? Oh, my special effect? Oh. There's a see-through book that I bought in Rome where you have transparent pages, and I just used that with a kind of Photoshop kind of technique. Yeah, I didn't know if that was a distracting detour or not, but people usually like looking at that. And then I talked about the revolving stage, and so the Truster, who designed this Hamlet that was a groundbreaking kind of stage design, did a Romeo and Juliet in 1938 where the tomb it has these abstract shapes. The catalog compares these to ice flows. And then a stage design, another scene where it's as if the backdrop is ripped. I mean, it is literally ripped apart. I believe cellophane was used, so you get views into the distance, but in a very abstract way that's very suggestive and, again, directly tied to abstract modern art. And it reinforces the idea of the universality of the scenes. And then the revolving stage was literally just that. We have some models of Jan Slidek's Merchant of Venice from 1933. And so there was a connection made in the mind of the designer to cinema, that there was a frustration about how conventional scene shifts in a conventional theater were distracted from the flow. So Truster said about, so when a scene ends in a conventional play, you draw the curtain, and then you open it again, it's a new scene. And Truster said, I don't like it when a curtain pulls the audience out of the illusion created on the stage. It's a very bad device. In Romeo and Juliet, when the curtain falls after the balcony scene, it's an interruption, bringing the audience back to the real world. I envied the freedom of filmmakers to effortlessly shift settings through editing. They use it to transition almost imperceptibly from one scene to another. So the relationship between cinema and theater, I wasn't making it up when I was showing the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, right? There's a direct influence, and so that's what they were. So you kind of simulate the effect of edits, and a scene dissolves from one to another with a revolving stage where you don't have to draw the curtain and you can just move the stage in front of viewers' eyes, shifting scenes. So the Merchant of Venice, it takes place in Venice. The motifs of Sladek include this famous lion's tower and these abstracted arches, reference to the Doge's palace. So you have, in an abstracted, very kind of minimalistic, suggestive way, the elements that give a sense of place, but yet it presented in an abstract way. Oh, and then it's also, with the revolving stage and mechanized movement, it's been compared to kinetic sculpture. And I made a reference in the label to Calder's mobiles, and one of the Czech scholars crossed it out and said, Calder's mobiles were after the 30s, and they're very different in style, which is true. I was just trying to give an example of moving sculpture that everybody would be familiar with. So I think he'd be more pleased with Naum Gabot, a Russian constructivist, the kind of Russian version of Cubism, which was very influential in Prague, the Eastern European tradition coming from the East rather than the West to Czechoslovakia. And then moving into contemporary, I'll speed it up here because it's 8 after 11. So we enter the post-Cold War period, post-modernism. One of the early contemporary sections has to do with something called Shakespeareomania, a production in 1988, just before the so-called Velvet Revolution, which meant the fall of communism in Czechoslovakia. And you had producers that condensed all of Shakespeare's plays into 3 acts. In other words, they conflated multiple plays into a kind of a hybrid. This was it was called the Goose on a String Theater, and it was not in Prague, but the city of Brno, which is the capital of the old region of Moldavia. And It wasn't three acts. They reworked all of Shakespeare's plays into three different performances. So it's not fair to say you got them all in one sitting, but they took bits and pieces and fragments. And this is indicative of what postmodernism does. It takes existing things that were created already, and it recontextualizes them. There's not so much the urge to create something new and entirely different from scratch that's totally original and unique and unlike anything came before it, but rather there's almost a feeling of futility by the 21st century or the approaching turn of the new century, that anything that can have been done, that could have been done, has been done already. So why even try to create anything new? Just take bits and pieces, not only from high art and fine art, or great literature, but popular culture, mix it all together and recontextualize it. And it's kind of illustrated in this program or poster, the cover of a playbill or a poster that is kind of a reworking of Dada by Max Ernst. These artists in the 20s and 30s, like Max Ernst, or Kurt Schwitters, that just took pieces of scrap paper, often with words, and pasted them together. One of the first postmodern art movements was neo-expressionism, where the style of the early 20th century German expressionists was revived in a very self-conscious way. And so there's one section called Journeys in the Mind, where you take, dynamic structures open to production rather than reproduction. So it's an irreverent take on Shakespeare. So King Lear, a part of it takes place in a swimming pool, and King Lear comes out in a bathrobe. And then he bobs around in the water, not really water, but he goes under, his body is concealed, and you see him bobbing his head as if he's swimming. And then his daughters, his three daughters, take their dresses off and reveal they're wearing swimsuits. And so there's kind of a swimsuit competition because the three daughters are competing, like an athletic competition for their father's validation. And by the end of the play, King Lear is naked. He takes off his clothing as in a symbolic way of revealing the inner truths and self-revelations. And so there's that. Demystifying the bard's sacred aura and transcending the rigid ideas about performing his plays. So, in other words, anything goes. And you don't, and they not only did not adhere to the script of Shakespeare, but significant texts were replaced with citations from the Bible, quotes from T.S. Eliot, and references to the Holocaust in some of the costumes. For example, some of the actors wear prison uniforms. Then continuing with Journeys of the Mind, a production of The Tempest by Jan Stepanek from 2010 has the characters in, and the catalog says this, tacky or kitschy costumes reminiscent of communist culture in East Germany and Czechoslovakia in the 80s. So that a disco ball is the helmet for Ariel, and the magician is in a kind of tacky cloak and a wizard's cap, that's Prospero, and Ariel looks like kind of a club kid with glittery hair and a body stocking, and Miranda is wearing a mini dress, and it kind of has big hair, a big 80s hair. And then there's somebody from a sailor wearing a sailor, Fernando. So it seems as if all these figures are coming from different stories and different eras. And that's another feature of postmodernism. It's very eclectic. It draws from popular culture. And the political message has to do with this kind of fake, ultimately cheap, but but a commercial, glittery culture of discos, of TV sets that were produced in the communist regime that gave the illusion of escapism and kind of a cheap simulation of gaiety and prosperity and pleasure, whereas it was just a kind of futile escape from this kind of prolonged low-level dread that was part of the daily lives of the people living in that era. So a reference to something that's very fun, but it still has echoes and resonance with what was a very unhappy period of the recent past. And then the importance in postmodernism of going back into history and not being afraid. Modernism was ahistorical. There was rejection, a conscious, self-conscious rejection of the past. Postmodernism revels in the past. There was a reconstruction of the Globe Theater in Prague in 1999. There's a model of this, a 3D model on a pedestal that you'll see in the final section of the exhibition, but there was a fire, so it burned down in 2005, sadly. Another feature of postmodernism is a very fluid attitude towards gender and sexuality, a very feminist approach, equal rights for, or assertion of women's rights, and a very frank presentation of gay life. And so in Richard III, but mixed with history, because who portrayed women in Shakespeare's era? Yeah, Shakespeare in Love and all that. And so the dressing of men in drag, but in very obvious drag because they have beards, but still wigs, is a part of that, delving into history, but still being very modern and self-conscious and referential. And then you'll see this costume on a mannequin. See what these are? They're men's shirts. So, hello, it's a man. It's a man, baby. And then poor Richard III, the hunchback, sickly king. And then Wit, Winter's Tale in 2008, an all-white production. And Winter's Tale was set in Bohemia, so in medieval Czechoslovakia. So all the costumes are white and white sets. And imaginative realism, this is what I was talking about in the beginning, that you have sets at the very end of this chronology. I don't know the year of Othello, but I believe it's within the last 10 years, where you have computer-generated imagery for designing the set. And so this is a... then the section on the intermission with posters, I just thought I'd end with something that was designed by an artist that we have represented in our collection. We just acquired this last year. I don't believe it's been on exhibit, but Jaroslav Malina, The Way to Paradise, a large painting that he had a near-death experience. He almost died in a car crash, and he was taking LSD and all these things in the early 70s when Neo-Expressionism wasn't even happening yet. So this is kind of a very prescient image of an expressionistic mode of representation when pop art and slick, Lichtenstein and Warhol were all the rage. And so he designed in 1999 this poster that's based on A Midsummer Night's Dream, actually an opera that was inspired by Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, another kind of expressionistic image. And sadly, Jaroslav died about 4 months ago. So we acquired this just months before he passed away, sadly. And so the concluding remarks I wanted to make is that so there's this freedom, Czechoslovakia liberated, no longer necessity for the meanings of Shakespeare's plays that are communicated to be hidden or covert, as they were during the Nazi or communist regime. regimes, but there's still opportunity and great relish in layers of meaning through stage design and productions, layers of meaning, multiple references, complex emotions, and a rich array of ideas that Shakespeare's words and stories inspire, and which theater designers can bring to vivid visual life. So with those thoughts, I hope you enjoy the exhibition and enjoy giving tours. Do you have, anybody have questions? Yeah.
Will the visitors, if they don't understand Shakespeare,
Mm.
will they understand?
Yeah, great question. Our objective is for all the plays represented to have audio tour stops where we summarize the plots of the plays in like 3 sentences. We have like I think it's like Twitter, like a 140 character limit or something on trying to maybe we should get Donald Trump to write the summaries. He's good at tweeting. But yeah, just really brief summaries so people get a basic idea of what Midsummer Night's Dream is about, etc. Okay.
We are passing out the catalog, so don't leave the auditorium without a catalog.
Oh, good. I haven't seen a catalog. I just read the PDF version. I just reread the digital version. Oh, I should also say a word about the programs. Kim Hopcraft has designed some really great programs that involve actors from Ohio State. We'll do excerpts from Shakespeare's plays. One will be an auditorium program, and another will be within the exhibition. We'll also have some of these scholars. Besides the Thursday night lecture by one of the scholars who wrote a catalog essay, I'm trying to set up a session where Joe and one of the visiting scholars and residents will be in the exhibition probably after a Friday Docent tour. I think I emailed Megan about it. I have to ask Joe first if the time was right. But on a Friday afternoon following a Docent tour to have him stationed in the exhibition for answering questions and so on. So.
There's a few staff in here. If I handed you a catalog and you're a staff member, could you put your hand up and let me reallocate that to a docent? And then I can easily get the staff member another. Oh, and the last thing, what was the name of that Zelinka guy? They actually did have a lot of theater and music productions. There was quite an active, under horrible, horrible circumstances. It was amazing how many writers and poets and theater people kept themselves alive doing this for themselves. And there also was an incredible, if you've ever seen the books of children's art. A lot of from the Holocaust, a lot of those drawings and pictures came out of Terezin. There was a concerted effort by the adults. I always tear up with to shelter children from the reality they were living under, and they had art classes. So a lot of those beautiful books they've made books of these drawings and paintings came out of Terezin, which is a very both horribly typical of what it was like, but also this difference because of all these art people that were and writers that were there.
And also the Opera Brindy Bar, which Opera Columbus did several years ago. And the woman who had the lead, several times over the next 9 years, the main character lived, and the chorus got sent to Auschwitz after each Red Cross building.
They kept they. But and I would imagine theater experts know a lot more than I, but there were theater productions actually done there. When you visit, they actually have an installation of what one of the set designs they use. They had to use, of course, materials that were just they could scrounge around and get in Terezin. But it's an incredibly powerful place, of course, to visit. And they also had a display of costumes, and I just sent them to you.
Oh, cool.
I'm sorry, I feel like an idiot. But anyway, so that was a connection I want to make sure we made for the.
Oh, and I just thought I had wanted to mention another kind of contemporary connection of Shakespeare and political oppression. There was a story on NPR about 2 weeks ago about the production, I think it was in Afghanistan, it was one of the Middle Eastern countries, of a production of Love's Labour's Lost that was produced after an area, I don't think it was Syria, but it was after an area was liberated. And it was such a life-affirming and important and exciting experience for the people to hear this production. And that's a play about the affirmation of women's rights and kind of gender politics. And so it was incredibly progressive and a kind of just real kind of a game-changing cultural event. So just as theater, like Nana was saying, theater continues and is important to Czechoslovakia today, and it has been through the 20th century. It's just, we can be really proud as Anglophiles, can't we, of the incredible impact and lasting and enduring value of Shakespeare's plays.
They would be produced in Czech?
I believe all these things were, translated, and you'll see in the first of the second catalog essay, the first one after Joe's essay, talks about, goes into a little detail about translations. Mm-hmm. It's very cool, yeah. Okay. So do they take a break now? Can I go?